In this episode, we're talking about change management, artificial intelligence, command and control organizations, and a lot more. Take a step with us on the perfect route. Welcome back, everybody. We have Michelle Meurer with us today. She is a highly experienced chief people officer, and we're so glad to have her on the show. Hello.
Good morning. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's my honor to be here. I'm looking forward to our chat today.
I am too. Um, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Michelle?
Absolutely. So, I started out my professional career not anywhere near HR. I was a practicing attorney and wandered into employment law. I really enjoyed it. And then 10 or 15 years into private practice, got an opportunity to move into HR, which I thought was a great opportunity to actually solve problems before they became problems and to actually be able to see the full life cycle. Once I got into human resources, I immediately fell in love and I've been here ever since. So I started out my career as a generalist and moved up through some leadership ranks and have had several chief people officer roles over the past 10 years. And really enjoy it. It's one of the things that I'm very passionate about is how we develop our people because they're our biggest asset in any organization. So
Mhm.
really looking forward to our topic today.
Thanks. Thanks. I'm looking forward to it too. Um, how's your perspective on learning and development changed as you've taken that journey into HR?
Well, there wasn't really any such thing as L&D when I was practicing law. You just kind of learn by osmosis. But I started out my career, I think I mentioned, as a generalist. And my first serious leadership role, we didn't have a learning and development department or team or resources or budget. And I very rapidly realized that that was a huge gap in our organization. So I took my generalist team and we carved out time and effort and energy for learning and development. Now, it was a beginner L&D department for certain, but we took an opportunity to have a lot of my team members certified as train the trainers to be able to help our team members develop, and particularly around soft skills, leadership skills, which I feel like oftentimes are the biggest areas that people need help in. We developed a full curriculum over my years there. As I've continued to grow and expand my leadership opportunities, I've had more structured and more fully formed L&D departments within my remit. And what I've rapidly realized and come to learn is there's probably no better investment in our budget and HR dollars than helping our people develop because change is constant. And most of my professional career, I lived in the technology space where change moves with the speed of light. And without being able to develop our folks, you rapidly fall behind. It's not just skill building, especially today, but it is a way to shape culture, to accelerate change, to make sure that change is successful, and to be able to help the business achieve its goals through all the complexity that exists.
Yeah, the organizational change implications are profound with what we do, and you're so right to call out learning and development as an investment. So many organizations see it as a cost center, and especially with changes in the economy, the temptation is let's pull the ripcord, reduce the costs, and everything will be okay. We hope.
Right. But hope is not a strategy.
No, no, luck is not much of a strategy either.
Exactly.
Um, it's always interesting how organizations are ready to just throw the plan out the window when there's a setback.
Absolutely, and then they implement massive change because
Mhm.
in times of budget constraints, there's always massive change in an organization, and then oftentimes look back over their shoulders and wonder why those changes weren't successful because you don't have anyone preparing and working through and helping team members actually navigate those changes. So, tends to be, unfortunately, a bad self-fulfilling prophecy oftentimes, and that's why you have to keep it front and center, particularly when an organization is going through difficult times.
Yeah. And that can be hard for, leadership and an organization to confront because their change is can be difficult to deal with anyway. And oh, by the way, we're going to throw this learning component at you, even though it should have been on your mind. Most organizations, the employees spend 5% or less of their time on employee learning. And frankly, it shows. Um, the more you invest in employee learning, the better off the organizations is. And at least I believe that. I think you believe that too. Um,
I do. Historically, that
so,
5% is all. Oh, sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Historically, 5% is also structured classes and taking people out of their day job for an hour, 2 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours. And they take a class and they learn some things, and it's great, and then they go back to their day job and it gets forgotten in the rearview mirror. And so one of the things that I think is even more relevant and more pertinent now, which we've certainly tried to do, in my most recent L&D organization, is change the tenor, change the way we're developing people and the access to it and how we reinforce it so that we actually continue to see growth from that learning because it's not a one and done.
Right. It can never be a one and done. There should be a progression with the learning. If we don't do that, then I don't think that we're executing the plan very well. Hopefully there is a plan, but that's a point for another day.
Right, right.
Um, yeah. So what should the learning function look like in an organization? If we consider it down from the frontline teams up to the senior leaders.
Mm. I think it has to serve everyone. Now, it does serve different roles and different levels of roles differently in an organization. You're not going to engage in learning with your executive leadership team the way you're going to engage in learning with your frontline managers, oftentimes because their needs are very different. But structurally, it has to be a hybrid model, in my opinion. It is a centralized L&D team. I think that's best. Decentralized, in my opinion, involves a lot of redundancy and isn't quite as efficient or effective. That team sets the strategy and the core programs, working with business. Because if you're not doing all of the things that you need to do to develop folks to use what you're giving them in their day to day job, you're missing the mark, in my opinion. So if you're not partnering with your business leaders and your HR team, your HR generalist team, as you're developing the curriculum and developing the skill sets that you're going to work with people on, you're oftentimes missing the mark. So I think that is huge. The other thing that is, in my opinion, one of the most important things is leadership buy-in. You cannot have an effective L&D program if your executive leadership team doesn't buy into it and doesn't reinforce that. And that means they take the same classes, they show up, they ask people in their check-ins, "What did you learn? How are you using it? What does this look like? What would you like to learn next?" And they're reinforcing the importance of it because if L&D sits simply as an HR function, in the HR space, and it never comes out of that space and gets into the true leadership reinforcement, it won't be effective.
Right. It's got to be more than just checking the boxes and saying we've had events, there's compliance. Um, and with the assumption that people learn something as they walk out of the events. As you point out, there needs to be accountability and a recognition that this is an investment. It's not just a cost or a diversion away from the busy schedule.
Yeah. It does, and it has to be interesting to people, and it has to be something that offers value to your team members, or it will be a one and done, and they will walk out the door and go, well, I checked the box. I put in the 3 hours that so and so made me put in, and now I'm done." And that doesn't work either, because when you think about, as human beings, what we tend to get excited and energized about, it's learning about things that interest us, learning about things that help us in our day-to-day, and that's the way you tap into really developing your teams is you focus on what is going to help them, what's going to move them forward, whatever level in the organization they are. And then their leadership team needs to continue to reinforce that.
Right. Right. And yeah, the reinforcement is key throughout the organization. It has to happen not only from the senior leadership team, but from the the executives and managers all the way through the organization chart.
Uh-huh.
Uh, uh, there needs to be not only buy-in, but commitment to the learning program. And at the same time, I don't know that managers and employees should take it on faith that, yeah, this is going to work. Um, to me, there needs to be a match between the learning program and what the organization culture feels like and what the strategy is.
You have to get continuous feedback, or to your point, it's just not going to work. And, I have oftentimes with courses or initiatives or programs taken feedback, sometimes gutted those, sometimes eliminated them, sometimes dramatically revised them, right? Because if you're going out to your audience and you're missing the mark and it is not helpful, or managers, leaders are not seeing changes in behavior, it's not helping better the business, you're not accomplishing anything. And it does require L&D to be agile and nimble and quick. And I think particularly today with the advancement of AI, the change is coming at us at a pace unlike anything I've ever seen before. And so without that agility, there's no way to keep up with what the organization needs to keep up with.
Yeah. And, AI, it affects L&D departments, operations, but it affects potentially the whole organization. And one thing I've found with AI is that organizations sometimes have to shoehorn it into the strategic plan mid-cycle,
Mhm.
which can be very concerning for employees. There's always that temptation to say that, oh, AI is going to come for my job
Yes.
or replace me. And, in some organizations, especially some of the tech companies, that has been the case. But I always, you know, advise people that AI can't come for you if you know how to use AI.
I completely agree. And that's one of the things in our most recent AI trainings that we have been talking about with our teams. One of the things that we have been stressing with our team as we have been teaching them to use these tools, particularly our technology teams, is this isn't intended to take your job. It's intended to augment your job and remove the things that don't necessarily require human intervention at this point in time, and to make you more career marketable.
Mhm.
It's not dissimilar from the days people were at first learning how to use computers or tablets or other new technology. And if you don't learn how to use it, you will rapidly be left behind. So we've tried to position it as career development, not just job development. And I do think that that has helped.
Yeah, that's the attitude I've taken with AI, not only in my own work, but in my consulting and coaching work. And it, it especially now, it helps to give people, some positives to look at. I like to remind people that they've been using AI for years. If they're searching on Google or Bing or on their phone, chances are AI has been in the chain of interactions at some point. They just haven't they just haven't realized that they're using AI. Um,
Well, and one of the things I've done with my HR leadership team is in our daily stand-ups, we added a section after, priorities and blockers to be tell us one thing, the team, that you have used AI on, and ideally something creative, right? Something that the rest of the team hadn't explored. And it is amazing to me how quickly they have not only adapted, but embraced that as an HR team, because they are figuring out ways to use AI to do all of the things that most people don't love to do. Like, oh, I've got to compare these two spreadsheets. Oh, I've got to analyze this data. I have to spend some time creating a course or content for a course. And there's a lot of pieces that folks have been able to grab a hold of very creatively to embrace AI. And I think embedding it like that, so it is something that people look at as another tool and not something to be afraid of, helps. Now we're moving a little away from the more standardized L&D topics with this, but I think with the advent of AI, it's extremely important to keep it front and center and make it something that people aren't threatened by.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's terrifically important to do. And I love, um, the the piece in the stand up where you're talking about actually including AI not only in the workflow, but, how it adds value to the work.
Mhm.
You know, it's not just a shortcut. Um, and AI isn't necessarily smarter than us, but it does see patterns it will miss. With
And there's a lot of speed to it, which helps,
yeah,
right? Because if you can expedite some of the tasks that are more monotonous and that you don't necessarily, and we all have them that you don't necessarily like to do in your day job, then it gives you more time to focus on what I call with my team the fun stuff, right? Which is really the stuff that we came into our roles in order to be able to focus on. For example, developing our team, right? Those coaching conversations, those going out there and working with the business to figure out what needs to be on our L&D roadmap and how we can work to accomplish the strategic goals and all of those things. If you're using AI to facilitate the more monotonous tasks, then you have a lot more time for those more qualitative tasks.
mhm, very good point, very good point. Um, what's a recent initiative that you participated in that captured the strategic potential of learning and development?
So there's been a couple of them. One that I'm very proud of is we developed a long-term people leadership skills program. And it's a 12-month course, one course a month, different topics. Folks rotate through the whole 12 months. And each topic is structured so that there is a set curriculum, so a course. There's follow up, there's development, and we have the people involved in those courses in cohorts so they can hold each other accountable. Um, what made that work is alignment to what we needed in the organization, right? We had some people leadership gaps. We had people leaders at, I think, most organizations at all levels of leadership skills. And it helped to bring them to a more even playing field in terms of their people leadership. The other thing that we did, which was fun and I really felt like it was pretty inventive, people complain oftentimes about not being able to take out an hour, 3 hours, or 6 hours out of their day for learning. So every Monday, we would release a learning leadership moment. And we did it for people leaders first, and then we expanded it to the entire population. And they were short videos, they were about 3 minutes on a variety of leadership topics. We took a lot of suggestions from the organization, from individual contributors, from frontline managers, from senior leaders about things to address. And then in our Teams channel, people would follow up and give feedback or talk about how they used it or talk about how it was impactful. And we really got a good A, listen rate on that, which is really important, and B, response rate on that because it was a very simple, easy to access, popped up in your Teams, popped up in your email, only took 2 or 3 minutes. Way to kick off your week. And I think changing the way you approach learning and putting it in different mediums like that helps a lot because there are people who are not going to sit through a 2 or 3 hour class, but a 2 or 3 minute video that
Mhm.
they can easily digest and think about and take into their week and use a simple tool or trick or tip makes a huge difference.
It does, and it also is that essential reminder of that weekly appointment for learning. Um, if they're gonna click on, that link on Monday morning, then they may think, "Oh, there's some extra time on my calendar where I can follow through with this, or I can complete this on-demand training," or they'll sign up for a face-to-face event if one's available.
Yeah,
So that
exactly.
I I love that.
Did have some face-to-face events that came out of those learning leadership moments. We
Really?
got back around topics, around content of them. Oh, I'd like to learn more about this. This is something we could really use more of. And so we then turned that into a variety of things, everything from part of our new hire orientation to part of our broader learning curriculum. So that's something for our listeners, if you have the time and the bandwidth to do. And truthfully, with some of the AI tools that are out there, it becomes very simple and it's not a really big time burden for your team. We found it to be very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point about the AI tools that are available. Um, it there's a bewildering array of them, but there are some great reviews online. I've been fortunate that I've settled on Riverside as my recording platform for this podcast. It's got some excellent AI pieces built into it. And there's some other tools I think we both could recommend to people that really can help it, turn out content much faster than we could even like 3 years ago.
Or 6 months ago.
True. I started this podcast almost 6 months ago, and I don't think I would have been able to keep it up without some of the tools that are available now.
Nice.
Um, and if I can do it, and I think a lot of L&D departments can do it. Um,
Completely. I would not call myself the most tech savvy person. If I can use it, anybody can.
yeah, yeah. It's it's the entry point is getting easier for the AI tools, but at the same time, we need to provide the training and expose people to some of the skills like prompt construction and including context in requests to AI, which is so important. We assume context when we talk with other people, but AI doesn't know.
Correct.
AI doesn't know if we're in a kitchen or in a kennel or an office. We got to tell it. Um,
Exactly.
at
Well,
least at least for now, until it can read our minds.
well, let's hope it doesn't get to that point anytime soon. My L&D team, I have a great member of my most recent L&D team, and he is an early adopter of AI. And so did a lot of prompt training to the entire organization to help use those tools. And it does make a huge difference, right? And I think sometimes folks get frustrated. They'll type in a query or type in a question and it comes back and it's wrong or it's not the right answer or they feel like it misses the mark. And so they get frustrated and it doesn't work and then they walk away. But it's A, learning curve around those
Mhm.
prompts, and B, the tools are accelerating at the speed of light, and so just because it didn't work well on a particular query a month or 3 months or even a week ago doesn't mean it's not gonna work on that today. So it is trial and error, it is learning like everything else, but if you've got a resource in your team, in your organization, who can spend some time learning about agentics and learning about prompts and learning about those kinds of things and teaching them to the organization, it's time well spent.
Yeah. It definitely helps not only operations, it can have a real value on, competitive strategy and on the culture of the organization too. There's so many opportunities for cross-functional collaboration involving AI. And, I've thought that, things like collaboration and change leadership really need to be emphasized in learning programs.
Absolutely. Because if you're not collaborating across the organization, we're back to that L&D exists in a silo in HR and it never adds the value that it otherwise can.
Mhm. Yeah, with silos, especially now, silos are just risk and more risk. It's kinda scary, and I can understand why, uh, for change management reasons, why silos persist. They're comfortable. They're little islands where things don't change. On the other hand, we're seeing so many changes in the economy with technology and even with the way organizations work together with each other and the way organization culture. works within an organization, yeah, change leadership and change management is essential.
Mhm. And it always will be. It always has been, and it always will be because, that old saying, "The only constant is change." It really
Mhm.
is. And if a business is not changing and growing and adapting, it's dying, and no one wants to be in a dying business. And so, if your folks, if your team members, if your people leaders are not skilled at moving themselves and their teams through that change, it slows everything down and makes it monumentally less effective.
Right. And, something else that I've thought about is that the younger generations in our workforce not only are accustomed to change, they want to see more change. If they don't, then they're liable to migrate to another opportunity.
And they also wanna see a lot of development. And I
Mhm.
do think particularly the few years, of COVID and people working from home, we saw a lot of early talent joining workforce during those few years, and they missed the proverbial water cooler chats. And so engaging with them and developing them and having those mentorship conversations with them became something that you had to be a lot more conscious about and a lot more deliberate with. And I think that is still true today. A lot of organizations, myself included, I've worked from home for the past several years. And so you have to engage that early talent, not just with structured L&D, not with just learning leadership moments or L&D courses, but with the development that comes from mentorship and comes from teaming them up, with team members who can help answer their questions and help develop them and help give them the tools that they need to succeed in the workplace.
Mhm. That collaborative learning is so important, yet it can be difficult to implement when people are working remote or working hybrid. And there's still such resistance to return to office in some industries and some organizations. It's just for me, it's not necessarily frustrating. It's just lost opportunities.
Yeah. Well, and I live in the tech world. I have for a
Mhm.
number of years. And quite honestly, working from home or working hybrid for software engineer type roles, developer type roles, architect roles, it's nothing new. They've been doing it for most of their professional careers.
Right.
And with the advent of COVID and everyone's moved to home, they just became more used to that. And to your point, most of them don't want to come back into the office. And I understand that. The reality of the situation is, though, if you're going to have an effective organization and you're going to effectively develop them and you're not going to bring them back in the office, you have to develop and put the tools out there to be able to engage people in your workforce from not just a learning perspective, but from a culture perspective, from a retention perspective, and just from a humanity perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the humanity component of what we're doing because there not only has to be empathy but compassion in in what we do and in the workplace in general. And sometimes I find that empathy and compassion somewhat missing, not only in return to office mandates, but just in some of the reactions I'm seeing from organizations where they're falling back on theory X, command and control. Here's what we're telling you, do what we say. Um, and most organizations are well beyond that stage.
Well, and that's a failed model. And I too have been very surprised to see those news articles and some of those quotes from people, particularly senior leaders who have, done the it's my way or the highway type of approach.
Mhm.
Uh, you don't win people's hearts and minds with that approach. You simply don't. And lest we forget, a job is not a prison sentence. People can vote with their feet on any given day. And if it is a command and control, most people are not going to stay in that environment long term. It just simply does not work.
Right. It's it's not only a morale killer, it just deflates and it actually increases risk. It deflates the chances for success.
Mhm. And
Um,
to your point about risk, it certainly does because people don't have loyalty for an
mhm,
organization that they feel like is just operating under that model. And you have more challenges with employee relations issues. You oftentimes have more challenges with compliance issues. You certainly have a lot less productivity because people aren't inclined to go above and beyond if they don't think the organization that they work for, the leadership team they work for, cares for them and cares about them, not just as an employee or a person that they're giving a paycheck to, but as an actual human being. And I think we miss that. And I do think it's harder to do it this way, like you and I are talking today, but it's
mhm.
possible, and we have to be deliberate about it, and the more deliberate about it you are, whether it's just carving 10 minutes out, 15 minutes out once a day to reach out to someone who you may not necessarily talk to on a daily basis, or checking in and having the conversations that you would have if you would walk to the coffee machine in an office. "Hey, how are your kids? What'd you do this weekend? What about that T-ball game?" Those are the kinds of things that foster connection because people are not just a number in an organization. They're human beings, and we have to recognize them as such.
Mhm. Yeah, it's and it to me, it's surprising and troubling that we have to talk about that issue again.
Mhm.
Um, but as you pointed out, we've got some executives who really leaned into the theory X, it's my way or the highway thing, and just not a great look.
No, it's disappointing for certain. And what I think will happen is the organizations that have chosen not to embrace that culture and not to embrace that approach, and instead have chosen to treat adults like adults
Hmm.
and to continue the way of empathy and human connection and a business that encourages loyalty and development, the conversation that we are talking about here, and a strong culture, those are the organizations that will ultimately thrive.
Agreed. Agreed. Speaking of thriving, what are your thoughts about measuring how learning affects and impacts business outcomes?
So, in my prior lives, we've measured it in many ways. The first is, of course, and we mentioned this just a few moments ago, on the ground at the time you're actually developing and delivering the content. So, what's the feedback from the folks who are hearing it, listening to it, using it on a day to day basis? So, you've gotta get that in order to get it out of the gate. Then it becomes a little harder to measure, but even more important to measure, which is finding out from the leadership teams, finding out from your managers what's working, where are they seeing behavioral changes, how are they seeing people adjust how they're approaching things. And some of the ways I have done that in the past is if you are assessing your talent, whether it's the typical performance reviews, quarterly, monthly, twice a year, annually, whether it is 9 boxes, whether it is talent assessment, to actually talk about the team members and what they've developed in and how that has been going since the last discussion, whatever that last discussion time period was, and how is it helping the business outcomes? Because you have to have those honest and open discussions in order to really modify and adjust and change and develop the L&D function to continue on to the next part of what needs to be done for the organization. And you can, of course, measure things like promotions and role changes and making sure you have successors in place. So, all of those things are very tangible, numbers driven, where you can show value to the investment that the organization is making in the development programs. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to conversations and boots on the ground around what's been changing in the business, and is the business able to accomplish its goals better, faster, more efficiently?
Hmm. Yeah, it's not only how much we're moving the needle, but how quickly we can move the needle.
Um,
Especially now with what we've been talking about regarding not only organizational change but AI.
yes.
There's expectations for publicly held companies, um, that they can turn on a dime, or they should at least be expending the efforts to do that. Um, you know, another question that it pops up in my head is, if we're focused on building leadership capabilities, what are some of the most important leadership capabilities that we need to have? Clearly, the ability to navigate change is one of them, but there must be others.
Um, yes, they have the ability to navigate change, adaptability, being able to not only navigate change internally, because we also can't forget that our leaders are people as well, back to that humanity conversation we were just having. And
Mhm,
they also lead through it. So they have to get themselves through a change curve and then they have to lead through it. So it's very much around change management and adaptability. It's also around leadership versus management. Further to the conversation we were having just a minute ago about command and control, that's not leadership, that's management, in my opinion. And the strongest organizations are organizations that develop those leadership capabilities. And that's not just for people who have direct reports, it's for everyone. Everyone in an organization can and should be a leader, and we should be focusing on developing those leadership skills. Strategic thinking, because that will become more and more prevalent, I think, in almost every role in an organization, particularly as AI automates a lot of the lesser value add, more executional, operational focused tasks. The ability to have those strategic and critical thinking skills is going to be important. And I think for our people leaders, particularly right now, and you mentioned this a few moments ago when you were talking about economic changes and all the changes that are going on in our world, we have to help our leaders lead through ambiguity because there is not a clear path. I don't know that there's ever been a crystal clear path in business, but I feel like the fog has definitely gotten more dense over the last year or so. And so leading through ambiguity and being able to successfully navigate that again for themselves and for others in the organization is absolutely critical.
mhm. Yeah, navigating through ambiguity is even more challenging now because we're getting so many conflicting signals in the media, in the marketplace, and the pace of change is happening so quickly that I don't blame managers and teammates for throwing their hands up sometimes and ju- just asking with dishpan eyes, "What do we do now?"
It can be overwhelming for sure.
Yeah.
And fact, people are human, right? Different people get overwhelmed at different points in times. I'm sure you felt overwhelmed at various points in your career. I certainly have. And when that happens, the key to it is to have an organization where someone can look at you with those eyes and say, I need help, right? I am
Mhm.
overwhelmed. I don't know how to navigate this. I need help. And they need to be able to do that without fear of repercussion, without someone looking at them like they're not successful or lesser than because they have to ask that question. Because the true sign and mark of courage, in my opinion, is being able to know when you need help and ask for
Yeah. The ability to ask for help is actually something I regard as a sign of personal strength and confidence
it.
rather than weakness.
Completely
You know,
agree.
yeah. Um, so how do we ensure that, in this ever changing workplace, that learning is accessible, engaging, and relevant?
So I think it goes back to flexibility and inclusivity. It's meeting the business where they are, meeting the team members where they are, and it's recognizing the path that both the business and the team members need to take and the end goal, which is constantly changing and moving, that you need to get to. So, in my view, it means you have to use multiple forms of content, mixed media. We were talking a little bit ago about my learning leadership moments and classes. It's in person, it's mentorship, it's written, it's video, it's self paced, it's social learning, it's all of those kinds of things. And you have to make sure that it's relevant to the team members that are actually using and being exposed to those tools. I've had the privilege of leading global organizations for the last couple of decades, and how learning looks in one region is not how effective learning looks in another region. So it has to be flexible, it has to be inclusive. You have to be willing to take that feedback, even when that feedback stings a little bit about your
Mhm,
programming, and you have to be willing to adapt and adjust and move forward. The other thing I think that is also extremely important is to listen to your team members. What do they need? What do they want? The folks who are on the ground doing the jobs day in and day out can tell you better than anyone what kind of development they need if you just stop and listen and ask them.
mhm. Yeah, it's not only listening, but again, having the courage to pose those questions because we're not always going to get the answers that we want.
Most of the time
Any
we don't.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a sign of resilience that we can not only ask these questions, but accept the answers and, flip our worldview a bit.
Mhm.
Any closing thoughts for our viewers and listeners, Michelle?
A couple. So the first is I've realized that there's a lot of change in our world going on right now. So if you are a person that needs help navigating ambiguity, navigating change, trying to figure out new tools, trying to figure out what to do next, raise your hand to ask for help. Find a trusted colleague, mentor, friend, someone that you can reach out to, because I think that is the way we navigate through the world that we're in currently. The second is let's not lose sight of learning. It's something that should happen, whether it's in small amounts or large amounts on a daily basis, not just when we log into a compliance training. And thirdly, share, right? Knowledge isn't something, in my opinion, that should be hoarded. I think it's better when it's shared. And if you have a tool, have a topic, have a course, have something that you've been particularly successful with, share it with the world. We all get better and stronger and can do our jobs more effectively if we are sharing best practices. So I think all of those things are pieces that lead us to a stronger L&D, stronger HR, and stronger leadership function. And at the end of the day, HR is responsible for leadership across the organization, and our people are our biggest asset in any organization.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, Michelle Meurer, thank you for being here today and sharing your thoughts not only on change management and AI, but so many facets of HR and employee learning and development. It was a real pleasure getting to talk with you today.
Well, and I have enjoyed it thoroughly. And thank you once again for having me on. It has been a great time. I've really appreciated and enjoyed it.
Thank you. And for our viewers and listeners out there, um, keep watching because we'll be taking another step on the perfect route. Have a good one.